about them this afternoon. And Ms. Richardson will talk about a number of them this morning and how they relate to Conrad. And but first, for the Swiss side, I've got a special greeting from Andreas Joder, who was born in Steffensburg, and he has sisters still living there, and he recorded this for us today. It takes a while to load in, but
Microphone.
first yeah, words before, so we'll see. Speaker button someplace. Ricky, maybe you can tell me where I'm listening here. Oh, there you go. There's a button that puts the audio to the screen.
There we go.
There we go.
Our Swiss cousin, my name is Andreas Joder. So, from my visit and the presentation at the last National Yoder Reunion in Shipshawana in 2017. I'm the son of Hans Jakob and Anna Yoder. Hans Jakob was a very dedicated researcher, ancestry researcher. He spent at least 20 years of his life digitizing and studying old documents in the archives of Switzerland, Canton Bern, and also of Steffensburg. Unfortunately, Hans Jakob and Anna both died in the same year, 2 years ago, in 2023, here in Steffensburg. I was born as the first child and raised in Steffensburg together with my 3 sisters, Barbara, Bettina, and Franziska. Our family has very strong ties, and we are currently 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren, and hopefully many more to come. We have a long family tradition, and this is why we meet at least twice per year in Steffensburg for the Yoder Christmas and also the Yoder Summer Party. Now, I wish you all a wonderful Yoder Reunion 2025 in North Carolina. Attached is a short video impression from our summer party a few weeks ago in the Lake of Thun, to Thunersee. All the very best, and have an exciting Yoder time. Goodbye.
Which lake is that, Chris?
Lake Thun, T-H-U-N.
When was this recorded, Chris?
Last summer.
Last summer.
This your time with the Yoder reunion. Thank you, Andreas.
Dr. Richardson, may I introduce you? It is our honor to have as a speaker our initial speaker today, Dr. Emily Coffman Richardson. She's a professional genealogist and lecturer based in Denton, Texas. She began researching her family history alongside her mother, exploring courthouses and cemeteries in Ohio and Pennsylvania. After retiring in 2019 from a career in higher education, she founded Kim Searchers, reviving her mother's genealogy business. She specializes in lineage applications, brick wall challenges, she may speak more on that, and complex family name conflicts. She is the incoming president of the Texas Genealogical Society for the 2025-26 term and currently oversees the society podcast, Lone Star Family Trailers. She serves as program chair for the Robson Ranch Genealogy Club and teaches genealogy courses for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of North Texas. Her current project is a 4-volume work on the descendants of the 5th great-grandfather Melchior Yoder. Who's a direct descendant of Melchior here? Wonderful. It's scheduled for completion in early 2025, and I think I can speak for all the North Carolina Yoders that if she's interested in pursuing a similar project along Conrad lines, she would have our full holistic support. Emily's passion lies in storytelling, so we are in for a treat today. A promise she made to her mother to bring their ancestors' stories to life. Let's welcome Dr. Richardson. I'm
going to ask which microphone. Do you care?
The big microphone.
The big microphone. Okay, that's what I needed to do. Thank you very much, and I'm excited to be here for this reunion and to be able to meet some additional relatives of mine. I was honored without a doubt, and when I was asked to speak today, and I hope by the end of this presentation, you're going to have a better understanding of my own personal relationship with the Yoder family, and particularly that of Conrad Yoder. So I want to make sure that we get started. So my agenda today is above, and it's talking about a number of different things. One, we're going to talk about the discoveries and the connections that have been found. Doing research on the multiple individuals that intersect with both Conrad as well as Melchior. We're going to look at the Yoder cousins. We're going to look at the work of David Schulze to find out about him. Johann Hans Yoder. You're going to learn about Nicholas Yoder Sr. as well as Jr. and also Conrad and Melchior. We're also going to touch upon the relationship with the Widener or the Whitner family. And finally, we're going to talk just about a little touch of DNA to sort of sew it all together. And at the end, I'm going to talk about a family together. I want to say that much of my presentation comes from a man that some of you have heard or been with, and that's Dr. Don Yoder. And I'm not sure I will do him total justice today, but I will tell you that I have learned so much being able to research what he has done and his understanding. I somewhat remember my mother talking about Dr. Don in her lifetime and being able to go see. We lived in the Philadelphia area for 35 years, so he was nearby. I know that she met him. I know that she knew him well, although I don't have that same memory. I think my life was taken up with my travels and actually at that time, my hotel industry experience. So we're going to talk first about a man by the name of Daniel Yoder. He was born in 1731 and he died in 1783. He is known now, today, to have been a first cousin of He was a weaver, and he lived in Upper Hanover Township, which is now Montgomery County, but at the time he was there, it would have been Philadelphia County. And he eventually moved to Hereford Township, which is in Berks County. His father's name, a Yoder, is unknown. Okay, we don't know what that name is. But we do believe that he, Daniel, immigrated on the 17th or about the 27th of October, 1764, because that's when he signed the Oath of Allegiance and Adulation, which was required of all immigrants at that time into Pennsylvania. And the oath required that they be faithful and bear true allegiance to King George II as they arrived in this new land. It denounced all pretenders of the throne, including James III, and it acknowledged George II as the lawful king and renounced any allegiance to the King of Great Britain. The oath was just a broader set of requirements that they had to meet, but that is the time when Daniel came in. This map is going to be difficult for you to read, but I'm going to show you a couple places on it. This first area shows you the area that was then Philadelphia County, or the Philadelphia area. And as you can see, it was right on the edge of Pennsylvania, abutting New Jersey. Next to it, what was known at that time as Bucks County, which also had a number of Yoders in it. And finally, at the top, we have Berks County, which is where Daniel ended up. Now, Daniel's will was what was found. It first appeared in the Yoder newsletter, number 16, in 1990. And it was found by Richard Yoder, who found it in a place called the Schwenkenfelder Library, which I'm familiar with. It is in the Montgomery County area, and I would go with my mother as a young child. My goal was to turn the microfilm reader, never paying attention to what she was doing, but that was my goal for the day, to sharpen her pencils. And every so often I got to use copy. So I have memories of Schwenkenfelder. The will was actually written in 1783. And Daniel was listed as a bachelor. And thus, according to English law at that time, under which he passed, his heirs were consisting of his cousins. His cousins' names included John George Lair, Maria Strutzman, who was his father's sister, Philip Lair, Elizabeth, the wife of David Schultz, John Jacob Yoder and Melchior Yoder, John Herblind, Magdalena Russian, Rosina Shelton. John George Lair was the executor of the will. It was written on the 20th of April in 1783, and David Schultz actually translated it from the German to the English on the 7th of June in 1784. So what we end up with at that time is a chart that looks like this. It's Mary or Maria Yoder, who married a Martin Strutzman. We have the father Yoder, whose son was Daniel, but he died as a single man. And we have another Yoder, who obviously is the father of Melchior and John Jacob, as they are listed together. But we have other names: John George Lair, John Heiblein, Peter Lair, Philip Lair, Elizabeth, who was the wife of David Schultz. And so it required some research at that period of time. And what we ended up finding out was that it was actually Maria, and she married twice. Her first marriage was to George Heinrich Lair. They had, and then she married Martin Strutzman. George arrived in 1727 aboard the ship Friendship, and he took the oath on the 16th of October in Philadelphia. Their 7 children, Philip, Johann George, Barbara Mary, Catherine, Elizabeth, and Magdalena, were listed in his will, okay? in George Lair's will, which was written prior to Daniel's will. Notice that Barbara, Mary, and Catherine are not listed in Daniel's will. Probably they passed during that period of time between when George Lair passed and when Daniel wrote his will. But all of the other names are in Daniel's will, confirming the Lair name and what it was all about. We also then know that Maria then married for her second marriage to a man by the name of Martin Struisman. He arrived on the ship Robert and Alice from Rotterdam and Dover about 1745. The name on the captain's list actually listens as Hans Martin Starsman, which should ring a bell from around here, as I discovered on your roads. They had a daughter, Rosina, who married a Michael Schell. And her name is, she was best known in all the records, of course, as Rosina Schellen. The IN added to determine that meaning the wife of a Schell. Martin's will lists Michael Schell as his son-in-law. It also lists his stepson, George Lair, which would have been correct, and his daughter, Rosina. So it all ties into a picture, and we know a little bit more about Maria, not Mary, but Maria Yoder at that time. Now, another name that I looked at was Herbline, which was it was initially translated at, and it's not Herbline, it's Herstein. He is probably from a sister of Daniel's father, so we still don't know the sister's name, but she married a man, and they had a son, Johannes. Now, Johannes is in the paperwork. He arrived for the first time in 1773 on the ship Union, and he was what was considered to be a redemptioner. So he had to come over and work for payment back of his passage. He worked for a man by the name of Lazarus Widener, sometimes written as Widner, of Oley Township in Berks County. What makes him interesting, Lazarus interesting, is his wife was also a Yoder. Okay, so we start to see that there's a connection here. We come to the new country and we work and live with relatives of a sort, of cousins of me. And she was the daughter of Jost, who was early on, and you'll hear more about him in Chris's time this afternoon. Their daughter, Mary, actually married a George Yoder. So mom was a Yoder, and then they married a George, and so that gets into cousins marrying cousins. Now, the interesting thing about Johannes is he returned to Germany because he wanted to be part of working on a devotional group, a book for the Pennsylvania Mennonites. And so he returned with 500 copies of that book on the 22nd of September, 1792, along with a man by the name of Johannes Schramm. And the idea was that Johannes Herstein would sell these books in Montgomery and Berks County, and Schmutz would sell them in Lancaster. Now, I will tell you that Dr. Don was working hard to continue this research and understand the family lore that went with it, because there's quite a story behind it, which I'm not going to take time to go into today. But it's something, I'll be honest with you, I'm going to spend some more time researching. So now we can extend this family tree a little bit larger. We've got Maria and her two husbands, George Heinrich Lahr and Hans Martin Struisman, and their children. We have Daniel, we have John Jacob and Melchior, and over on the right-hand side, you'll see we have a female Yoder that married a Herstein, and their son is Johannes Herstein. So this chart helps us with that understanding. Now, it was then in 2002 when we discovered information about Melchior. And Melchior was found in a baptismal record stating that his father was Nicholas Yoder and his mother was Anna. And this is a result of his christening in 1736. And at the same time that one was found, another one was also found from 1730 that names Johann Jacob Yoder. So the two cousins, Johann Jacob and Melchior, we now know that their father would have been a Nicholas. Okay? And so we start to see that and there, of course there's the fourth one, the Herstein, but we know little about that family, but we start to see the growth here in that. So we know about the cousins, and what was interesting is it brought up this man, David Schulze. So let's talk about David. David lived in 1717, and he passed in 1797. David married Elizabeth Lair, who was the daughter of Maria Yoder and George Lair. David was what we defined at that time as a bush lawyer. I had never heard that term before, and it was fascinating to go out and do some research on it. This means he was self-trained as a lawyer, he was a surveyor, and he was someone who was a skilled preparer of wills, deeds, and agreements. He was part of the original Schwenkenfelder immigrants who arrived in 1734, settling in what today we know as Montgomery County. His daily records, and he kept wonderful daily records of all of the interchanges he had with other people, named, and what he was doing with that other person. They're not long, they're not lengthy, they don't give details, but the important thing is we have names. And this is an example of the journal and paper that was done. It was originally published in 1900 by a man by the name of Henry S. Dotter, and then again in 1953 by Andrew S. Berkey. And through copies obtained from Schwenkenfelder, I was able to look more deeply into his work and what he did. Now, in the inside cover of the most recent edition was actually a copy of one of his surveys. And I realize it's difficult to read and some of it's upside down, but what's fascinating is he has Lancaster County in the center. To the right is Maryland, okay, and the Susquehanna area, and to the left is Indian land. And so when you think about the timing and when he was there, this was his image of the land at that period of time. It also mentions the effort of Cloister, which is a place that he spent some time during his life. Now, in the book are early land surveys, and here is an example of two of them. On the 26th of March in 1759, he was surveying for a man by the name of George Zewitz. But what's important is on a secondary, so other people involved in this, there was a John Yoder, and he was doing it in Upper Saucon Valley of Northampton. On the 29th of April in 1760, he was in Hereford Township, we just heard about that, in Berks County. And he was looking at land for George Lair, and along with it is Martin Struessman and Philip Lair, his brother. And so this puts them all in the same place at the same time doing this. But the journals gave many more clues than this. It defined what we consider to be sort of the four lines of the Yoders who came to America. He was helpful in us better understanding this through his writing. One being the Yoders of Oley Township, two, the Mennonites that were in Bucks and Lehigh, Melchior, who was in Montgomery County, and a man by the name of Conrad Yoder, who moved to North Carolina. And you can see on the 28th of September in 1774, a John Jacob Yoder was helped by David Schultze to write a letter to Conrad Yoder in Carolina. And we have full belief that this John Jacob, or Johann Jacob, is the same as that of the brother of Melchior at this period of time. The authors, when they went through and did the work of David Schultze, were also using additional documentation that they found in Schlenkenfeld. And so they would put notes in the journal. And so here's the note on this. The next event of any importance during this year was David Schultze's marriage to Elizabeth Lahr. It is quite possible that David's second wife was the sister of his hired man, Philip. True, she was. The marriage ceremony was performed by Reverend George Michael Weiss of the New Goshenhafen Church on June 27, 1758. Elizabeth Lahr was 21 years younger than her 41-year-old husband, her birth date having been given as April 29, 1739. The Lahr family belonged to the Reformed congregation at New Goshenhafen. And so you can see that this information was included, which provides additional information for us that needs to be double-checked because it's their view, but they're closer to the timing than I am today, doing it 100 plus years later. Now, it takes a moment, but I want to talk a second about this New Goshenhafen Church because it plays a part throughout this entire story. The majority of early settlers in this region came from Germany and were members of either the Lutheran or the German Reformed churches. There were two German Reformed churches established in Goshenhafen: the old German Reformed Church and the new German Reformed Church in New Hanover Township. Goshenhafen is probably a name that the first German settlers adopted from the native people. The origin is said to have meant wonderful tubers. T-U-B-E-R-S, yes, wonderful plants. The prefixes old and new were used to establish the proximity to Philadelphia, which was the center of the world at that time in this area. Old referring to the one that was closest to Philadelphia, and new referring to the more remote location. The site where the new church was located was donated actually on an early date to a grouping of religious churches, Lutheran, Mennonites, and Calvinists. It was attracted 58 acres. Each congregation was given a plot on that 50 acres where they constructed church. Both the Lutheran and the Mennonites sold their land, and it went to the Calvinists and the Reformed churches. And that's how they ended up where they are. The following, though, can be said about Reverend George Michael Weiss. Quote, Mr. Weiss preached at a branch place called Goshenhafen, about 10 miles from Faulkner Swamp, the last time on October the 12th, 1727. He celebrated the Lord's Supper. He is considered one of the eminent Reformed pioneer clergymen, and he was the first pastor of the New Goshenhafen Reformed Church. It's often been called, he's been called the first mission superintendent of the Reformed Church in America. And there are a number of Yoder weddings and their spouses at this church. Additional notes. Here's one about Martin Struman. David Schultze organized and wrote the accounts of Martin Struman and Mary Maria Lahr, his wife, in the estate of Heinrich Lahr, the father of Maria. That note is wrong. Heinrich Lahr was her husband. Martin Struman, her new husband, helped her to close out the administration of her old husband's will. Her previous husband had died in 1739. This note is written in 1759, 20 years later, a year after she married. That's when they handled his account. Now, why it took 20 years is unknown, but it's there, and that's what's important to know. You'll also see at the end, it says on May 25th, Philip Blair went home after he had lived with me about 2.5 years. That coincides with the time that his mother remarried. And his sister married. And so he went and lived with his sister at her new husband's house instead of staying with his mother, who had remarried to a new man. The will is fascinating when we take a look. It's much harder to read, and so I put some stuff on the side. But the bill of Martin Struesman and Maria, his wife, the last surviving widow of the farmer, Heinrich Blair. It doesn't say father, it says farmer, from Hereford Township in Berks County, who died in 1739, as administrators of the deceased Heinrich Blair, including all goods, movable and unmovable, which belonged to the deceased, which were in the possession, and also what they had paid on the 21st day of February 1759. So all of this work was done by David Schultze. So there's a relationship, and of course his wife now is the person she's working with her mother. Interesting. Okay. There's other notes that are done, and here's some from Journal 2. On February 1769, a note by the translator says, Yoder lived on 130 acre in Hatfield Township, Montgomery County. He did, and that is Melchior's land that he owned in Hatfield at the time that this was being written. On the February 26th, Jacob Yoder was here. On February 27th, Melchior Yoder was here. I guess they couldn't come together, or that's a missing date, or whatever, but they were there separately. A note states, the Yoder families constituted a part of the first large Huguenot immigration to this country, circa 1714, and they settled in the Oley Valley. Schultz probably became friendly with them in the course of surveying trips to that vicinity. Yes, and then he married into the family. So he was very familiar with them. On March 1780, old Hansel Yoder died sometime earlier this year, and in 1790 he sent a letter to Johann Jacob Yoder beyond Skippack, and Jacob eventually moved and was out of the area. Now, one of Dr. Don's most interesting things actually occurred in 1954. And when I uncovered this, I was fascinated by it, and actually went and sort of redid his research and my old new research. And so this is a written article from that event, and I'm going to read it, and I apologize for that, but I need to. Hans Yoder was remembered in Germany as well. As late as 1771, his grandson Jacob made the long return journey to the Palatinate to transfer some land to Hans Yoder's eldest son, John. Many years ago, while searching for Yoder origins, I discovered in the Berks County Courthouse at Reading the curious German deed, dated at Nutzstadt in the Palatine in 1771, and sealed with the sale, not of Pennsylvania or Berks County, but of the electoral Palatinate. The story is a curious one, as it is recited in elaborate formal 18th century German in the deed itself. Hans received land from those honored proprietaries. Those were the Penns of Pennsylvania, half of which passed to his eldest son from his first marriage, John, and half to his younger son from his second marriage, Daniel. Now, this is a different Daniel than we've talked about. Okay, names run common, and John and Daniel are common. Daniel died in young manhood, and the land could not go back to his half-brother because of the rules at that time. Instead, it went to his first cousin, Johann Yoder of Musbach in Neustadt. Musbach is in the Palatine. This Johann Yoder is described in the deed as a son of Hans Yoder's brother Nicholas, who remained in the Palatine. And in 1771, after a laborious legal transaction, the farm was transferred back from the Palatine to the Pennsylvania cousins to maintain the land in America amongst the family. The deed was considered by Dr. Don as undoubtedly the most important document on Yoder history from the colonial period, because not only does it connect the elusive Palatine chapter to our family history, but also the Swiss origins and the others. I was so fascinated, I thought, okay, in today's world, I should be able to find this. Let me see. And I did. And here it is, in German. And I want you to know it's in Berks County deed book, number 2. And you open it up, and it's the very first page in that deed book. And it's entirely in German. And it has the seal of the Palatine that's included as part of it. And here it is in Berks County, and you're going, why do they have a German deed? Everything else is in English. This is a German deed. What is this? I actually went so far as to go back and use artificial intelligence multiple ways, got this translated down from the German, the old German script, into script that could be read today, and then translated to English. And he is right in so many ways about the importance of this document. There are 3 people in this document. The first is Johann Hans Yoder, who originally owned the land. He purchased it in 1734, okay, and he got it in Oley of Bucks County from the Pence. And we can find that deed. That deed is available. He died and left a will, and then it went to number 2, his son by his first marriage, who inherited the northeast area of the land, and number 3, the son Daniel by his second marriage, who obtained the southwest part of the land. But Daniel died. He died intestate in 1747, and he had no heirs. And so, because of the law, his land went to a man by the name of Johann Yoder. Johann was living in Musbach, and he was listed in the deed as the eldest son of Nicholas Yoder. And so he got Daniel's land rights. He then, 14 years later, 24 years later, sells the land back to the individual number 2. And so, yes, we have a Johann Yoder selling back to Johann Yoder, and you think that's not confusing. Read that in German in the deed. Oh my. Yes, I was like, oh, I need help. I need help trying to figure this out. But what is important is if they were trying to keep all of this land in the family, not in Germany. I mean, it wasn't helping the guy in Germany. He wasn't coming over, but it was there. And so what happens then is we know, therefore, that Johann Yoder had 2 sons over on the left, and Nicholas and his wife Hannah had another son that never came to the United States. Okay, and so because of the cousins, because of the lines, we were able to dictate. So we have Johann added to Maria, added to Daniel's father, Daniel, the gentleman that died initially, to Nicholas, who we know is the father of Johann and Melchior, Jacob and Melchior, and then to the female first son. So they are all added together. So at this point, let's look at Nicholas Yoder Sr. He's known to be the son of Adam and Barbara. He was in Steffensburg in the canton of Bern in Switzerland. He was the grandson of Nicholas Yoder, who lived in 1609 to 1680, and his wife, Anna Traschau. We don't know truly when he left Switzerland for the Palatine. That we don't know. And we don't know an awful lot about his wife. She's another Anna. I'm not sure what it is about Nicholas's marrying Annas, but we have 3 in a row. They all marry an Anna. Some of them are called Anna Catherines, but it's confusing because you're not sure which record you're reading at the time. His baptismal date, we have Nicholas Yoder's at 5 October 1673 with his parents. And we don't know when he died exactly, but we know about it based on a deed that I'm going to show you in just a moment. Now, while all this was going on, we found 2 more children and their baptismal records of a man by the name of Johann Albrecht and a woman by the name of Anna Maria Sussman. As far as we know, Johann was born in 14 January 1725, Anna Maria on the 4th of January in 1728. And so we're not sure, we don't think either one came over. And so we know for certain that Nicholas Yoder Jr., whose father is Nicholas Sr., had 4 children. Johann Yoder, Anna Maria, John Jacob, and Melchior. The last 2 came to the U.S., the first 2, as far as we can say, stayed in the Palatine. Okay. So, in 2012, or 2011, Chris Yoder, I guess it was 2012, Chris Yoder sent me a note. Yeah, 2012. April of 2012. That's a typo, April of 2012. And on the note, he was sending me a copy of the October 2011 newsletter. And he simply said, "Your mother would be so excited. Get back involved." And I'm like, okay, Chris, I can probably do that. And it was the announcement that the relationship between Conrad and Melchior had been discovered. And this was the chart that was listed in that information. And so we see the older Nicholas with his son Adam. We see then Hans, Nicholas, Barbara, Jost, and Casper as their children. And below you see Johannes, Maria, Daniel, our cousin without a father, we don't know the name, Nicholas, and Conrad being listed. And so all of this happened because of work done by a man by the name of Dr. Alfred Hans Huby, who published an article in, and it's a German-Swiss newsletter. I am going to badger this name. Schweitzer and Schweitzer Abkommling in Reformation, Kirchenbach, Usbach, and Neustadt. Got that? Okay. It's the Swiss and Swiss descendants in the Reformed Church Register of Usbach. Okay. And he had done work on that, and Dr. Don had run across this article. It was something he had sitting on his desk for a long time, hadn't paid attention to it. It was in German, needed to translate it, but it shows all of the baptisms in the Reformed Church of Wiedendahl that Nicholas had. But most importantly in that was this information in German. It says, Nicholas Yoder plus Bohr, 1740, son Conrad, left 1740, in Wiedendahl, 15 January, Walt. Basically what that is talking about is Nicholas Yoder died before 1740, and his son Conrad, spelled with a K, is living in 1740 at the is living with his older brother, Nicholas Yoder Jr., whose children were Johann Albrecht, John Jacob, Melchior, and Anna Maria. And so it finally puts Conrad in a place in Musbach with his brother, therefore connecting him to his parents, and therefore understanding that Conrad was the nephew of Hans and Jost. And when he got here, that's who he probably lived with. The research I thank so many people for on Conrad that have come before me, whether it be George Yoder or Fred or Don Yoder, and I have to say this, Chris was here yesterday and he was scanning information from Fred Yoder's files. And in Fred Yoder's files was a letter from my mother to Fred written in 1977 asking to buy a copy of the Conrad Yoder book. And that in itself is special, right? But I get the letter back from Fred explaining why he didn't think that that was exactly the right connection, but he'd be more than happy to sell the book to my mother. I have a copy of that book signed by him in my life. So my mother bought the book and he actually signed it. So how fun was that, right? Okay. But it comes from them doing work, the David Schultze connection, and then we also have the Widener connection. And we saw the Widener name already with Johannes, who came over and was a Dempster, and he lived with Lazarus. So we've already got that name in all of this. But let's first take a look at Schultze's references. So here's where he names Conrad. On September 6, 1774, John Mayer arrived from Carolina on the 6th day after 20-day march with a letter from Conrad. Now, whether that letter was going to him or to somebody else, it doesn't say, but the letter was coming from Conrad. He was in North Carolina. On September 28th, John Jacob was here, and I wrote a letter to Conrad in North Carolina. On June 24th, there was a letter to Conrad and John Akel via Helig, via Ludwitzer, via J. Wyant in Carolina, and that is the number of people that letter went by Anne to get to Conrad. On July 25th, 1782, sent a letter to Conrad with Michael, in Carolina with Michael Widener. So Michael was back in the area, he picked up the letter and took it back. October 26th, Jacob Hiltzel brought a letter from Conrad in Carolina, and then a note at the end, 1790, Conrad Yoder in Carolina also died this year in April or May. So he was keeping track of Conrad even after he left the Philadelphia region. But it's only fair that we talk a little bit about the Widener connection. In a book called Counting Kindred, which was printed in 1940, reprinted in 1983, we have Henry Widener, who patented his North Carolina land as early as 1750, and on one return trip from Pennsylvania, he brought a wife, Mary Mull, and a youth, Conrad, ancestors of a large and esteemed estate. So, we're seeing the connection between the two. We also know that Henry is documented in Oley Valley as having been up in that Philadelphia area because he worked for Hans in the harvest. How do we know that? In the settlement of Hans's will, Henry is noted twice. Once for the work on the harvest, and second, because he was owed money from Hans at the time. Other people that are noted in this are Elizabeth Yoder as well as Jost Yoder. Elizabeth was probably David Schultze's, might have been David Schultze's wife. No, she would have been that. Elizabeth Yoder would have been, who knows, she would have been someone involved within the family at that moment. He's also noted, the Wideners, between 1747 and 1758, George Widener and Catherine Mull were married by George Michael Weiss at the New Goshenhofen Church. So again, we see that church brought into it. At the same time, Heinrich is there and witnessing the marriage of his kinsman, as it's called in the document, and I'll show you that in a second, called Titus Whitener. In 1750, he helped to execute a deed regarding his mother in Lancaster, and the account book that showed that they outfitted a wagon with 437 pounds of iron was done. So we know Conrad was north of the Philadelphia market. He had made connections at that point. He was there with Whitener at the time. They were connecting with each other. And here is Whitener's, this is Titus Whitener's marriage certificate. And it's very, very difficult to see, but down at the bottom, let's see, the very last name on the bottom happens to be Henry Whitener. Now, Henry sold Conrad 200 acres in 1762 on the Jacobs Fork River. And we believe that Conrad originally came over in 1744 on the ship Newton, where he is listed as Conrad Yoder. Also note, Jacob Brush, who married a daughter of Maria Blair Stutzman. She had a daughter, Magdalena. She married Jacob Brush. So there's a connection there. We don't know where Conrad lived in Pennsylvania. We think it was with his cousins, but it could have been with any of the Yoders that were his cousins at that time. This, of course, is displayed downstairs. This is the show of the deed for Conrad getting his land here. But personally, I like this map, which shows Conrad with the orange where his land is, and then a lot of the other names that we're comfortable with within this entire thing. And of course, then also downstairs, you can see the Widener tombstone. So we've sort of come full circle. I was interested, I have done a lot of research on Widener, and I have to thank, without a doubt, Kathy Gunther Sullivan for having done the write-ups. If you want to learn more about the Henry Whitner family, I strongly recommend you go to WikiTree. Look him up on WikiTree. She has done all the work, and it's just fabulous, everything that she's done there. And so my congrats to her on that. Now, DNA. I went to the FTDNA site to look at Y-DNA for the Whitner family, and it confirmed that Peter is the father of Heinrich, which I knew from some other documents that I had seen. It also confirmed that Adam was the father of Lazarus, which we knew, and which, again, Lazarus being where he was up north, Henry being here, not surprising. But then the FTDNA site goes on and says, the descendants of either Adam or Peter, the two men were kin, and descendants share the same Y DNA. So, someplace probably 2 or 3 generations back, I haven't been able to go back far enough to figure out where the intersection is. The Lazarus and Henry were cousins of some sort. Probably 2 or 3, cousins down kind of thing. But they were cousins. And that is, obviously they knew the Yoders, obviously they connected with the Yoders, and so the families were intertwined. I also made the decision to look at autosomal DNA. And autosomal DNA only goes back so far. You can only use it, 3 or 4 generations back. But I actually have 51 connections and matches of autosomal DNA between myself and other descendants of Jacob Yoder, who is a son of Melchior. DNA happened before my mother was doing research. It happened after she was doing research, and so she wasn't familiar at all with DNA. And I sort of put DNA into the place where I think it's appropriate. These are really small segments, but what I would tell you The blue and the red, 100% across all 51 that I've been able to have tested, match me that are Melchior. Probably what's more exciting to me is the colors that you see that are sort of turquoise, yellow, and purple. Those are Conrad Yoder descendants matching me, which is appropriate because Conrad was the uncle of Melchior. And so the autosomal works, right? The autosomal was there. Okay. So one other family hop. When Chris, I got to change on this one. When Chris sent me this message, I was going to soon be involved in a wedding of our youngest child. And his new wife hailed from a place I'd never heard of at that moment, called Hickory, North Carolina. And I picked up the phone, and I called my son and said, "Hi, are you with the in-laws, the new in-laws this weekend?" He said, "Yeah, I am." I said, "Do me a favor and ask them if they recognize the name Yoder." Phone cuts off. I'm like, okay, fine. And a few moments later, the mother-in-law to be calls and says, "I understand you're asking about Yoders. Can I ask why?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'm working on this genealogy, and I got this thing, and it says that this guy in Hickory is from there, and he's related to me." And all of a sudden, he gets really quiet. And she goes, "Well, maybe we can start with me." And so we discovered during the work that Robin, who's now Robin Wright, her father goes all the way back to Conrad Yoder through his mother. And her mother goes all the way back to Conrad Yoder. Awesome. And so my son and his wife and the 3 little girls, but more importantly, Betty Pitts, is in the audience today as I celebrate in front of you the relationship of the Conrad and Melchior in a very new and different way. It's the only time I've ever put together an ancestry tree where the granddaughters have 3 sets of Yoders across the top. So in conclusion, let me say this. None of us know where genealogy is going to take us. Or should I say, might take us, or will definitely take us. New records are coming online all the time. More people are searching forever for their relatives, and I get calls all the time. We need to thank those that have come before us, and I hope I've done that well today. I have one additional person I want to thank in just a second. But we also need to think seriously about our homeland information will be passed on. So much is lost because we don't take the time to tell the stories. And it's important to get your writing, get your findings, get them saved, give the stories to the children so they have something to pass on. My sincere thanks goes to Chris for a phone call a number of years ago that said, and a letter, "Don't you want to get back involved?" And I thank you for giving me that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Richardson. Before we take a quick bathroom break, do any of you have any questions for us?
Well, if not,